think the feed's going, and I'll apologize to the folks that are tuning in online. It's 23 or 24 after we had a lengthy and profitable introduction discussion this evening. We are picking up the discussion in Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 14, which is where we stopped last week. There is a vanity that takes place on the earth. And there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. And there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. I'm going to stop there for a moment, make sure we understand what he's saying in this verse. Anybody want to take a stab at paraphrasing what this verse says and shorten it a little bit to just the gist of it? There are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. And there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. What does that mean? While we are alive, on this earth, in time, living, sometimes bad people are going to have good lives. They're going to live as if they were the righteous. One of the things that, for instance, he connects the idea of obedience to your parents. He said this is a commandment that has a promise connected to it. What's the promise? Anybody remember? Long life. Very good. So there are going to be wicked people who have long lives, don't have a lot of trouble or difficulty. They are prosperous and blessed. You'll recall how Job lived. He lived a very prosperous and blessed life, right? And in fact, when Satan was talking to God about Job, and Job said, and God said, have you considered my servant Job? He's a faithful man. Satan's response was what? Well, of course he's faithful because you protect him and you guard him and you give him all these things. We associate that kind of life with a blessed life. Abraham prospered. When Isaac, no, it wasn't Isaac either. It was Isaac's son, Jacob. When Jacob went and worked for Laban so that he could get his wife, what does the Bible say about everything that Jacob did while he worked with Laban? He prospered. His flocks multiplied. When Laban starts going, okay, look, you can have those and I'll have these, then God made sure that Jacob's flocks prospered. And so Laban came back and said, well, I'll take these and then you have those. And it was, dividing them by the spotted and the solid. And he switched it around. When he saw that Jacob's flocks were doing better than his own, he's like, well, okay, I want those and you have these. And then what happened? Then the other group started praying. Okay, so the righteous and the godly, see, they have blessings from God, right? He's warning us that while we live on this earth, we're going to see that there are wicked people who seem to live well, I'll even go further than seem, who do live easy lives. They prosper, they make a lot of money, they live in a nice house, they have nice families, they lie, they cheat, they steal, but there's no consequence for it. And then there are righteous people who are going to have miserable lives. We talked about that Sunday morning, didn't we? How did Paul, by inspiration, describe the lives of the apostles? He said that they were abused, that they went around hungry, that they were homeless, that they were poorly dressed, they were mocked, they were beaten, they were jailed. They were all eventually killed. Had they done anything worthy of any of those things? No. How had they lived? As righteous men following God. And yet if you look at their life, it looks like they've got cursed lives. That's what's going to happen under the sun. There are going to be some people who do evil that it looks like have wonderful lives. There are going to be some people who do righteous, and it looks like everything that can possibly go wrong is going wrong, and God most certainly must be judging them. And he says that's just the way it's going to be. It's a great evil. And it's vanity. It's just life. So listen to what he goes on to say. I commend joy. For man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go well with him in his toil throughout the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. If we allow ourselves to become bitter and angry because of the injustice that we see in time, we are going to have horrible lives. And we're ultimately going to find ourselves questioning faith. We're going to find ourselves in that place where we're angry. We're angry because these wicked people are getting all this good stuff, and because I'm not, and it's hard, and I don't have anything, and I'm barely scraping by, and life isn't fair. And we're going to find ourselves asking the question, why do I do this anyway? Why do I tell the truth if lying is easier, gets me a better job, and makes me more money? Why do I not steal if I don't have? Because I'm honest. And somebody else has an abundance because they're not. Why should someone be faithful to a spouse if their spouse is not faithful to them? You ever heard anybody suggest that? It's called revenge adultery. Well, my wife cheated on me, and so I'm going to cheat on my wife. My husband cheated on me, so I'm going to cheat on my husband. That is starting to say, wait a minute, this isn't fair. I'm doing all the right stuff, and I'm miserable, and they're doing the wrong stuff, and they're happy, and that's not fair. He says, don't live that way. Learn to have joy, even in this world. Yes?
Can Satan bless a sinner or someone that's doing evil if God is withdrawn from you because you're a sinner and then Satan has control over you? Can Satan bless?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't know what the limits of Satan are today when it comes to that kind of stuff. I know that Satan promises to. You'll recall when he tempted Jesus, he said, I'll give you all the kingdoms that you see of the earth. So he at least claims to have the ability. Do we have an example of him ever doing it? Not sure that we do. He did come through on one thing. Well, not really. He kind of lied about it. He fudged. He told Eve that it would make her like God. It didn't really make her like God, except for it made her like God in knowing good and evil. And he was insinuating one thing where, like most liars would, if he was called on it afterward, would have went, but I didn't really tell her anything that wasn't true. I just didn't tell her the whole truth. So is it possible? I don't know. I'm not going to put anything past it. I don't know exactly how the dynamics work, but I do know this. There is a promise right here in the book that evil people will, in fact, look like they're living righteous lives. And righteous people will look like they're getting what the evil people deserve. And that we should not allow that to affect our attitude toward life. That we should have joy anyway. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a really, big question, and it's hard to give a 10-second answer. But what I was thinking is, one is everything that's good comes from God, and the rain falls on the just and the unjust, and God's good to all His children. And so I think, whatever is good, whatever is successful, all of that, your abilities come from God. Everything good does. And I think of Satan as a destroyer. And so he's not the persecutor. He's out there to, if you're a believer, and that's why you may see the wicked, because he's not coming to them. He's already got them.
Well, except for this, yeah, I'll expand this just for us to think about. I appreciate this, and this is the kind of thing that I like to happen, where we probe and we look and we push and we look at it from every angle that we can and have these kind of discussions. This is a healthy thing, in my opinion. It may be, though, that the way that Satan is deceiving and capturing folks is by allowing them to prosper and believe what we read about in verse 11, that because nothing's happening to them and because life is good, then it must be okay. Yes.
That's a really strong impulse to have. If I'm succeeding, things are going on, you think that you're doing everything right. That's a really strong impulse.
And it's just not true. Listen, brethren say it all the time. And it's not true. Just because your life is going well, just because you got a raise, just because you got a nice house, just because, that doesn't mean that you're living righteous. It may be that you are living righteous, but we can't look at those things to determine whether or not we're living righteous. What do we look at to see whether or not we're living righteous? Are we doing the will of the Lord? Are we living righteous lives? That's the only question. And by the way, Job's 3 friends made that mistake and assumed that when he lost all those blessings that he must have sinned. And what was Job's response? You know, I've examined myself and probed and looked, and I just can't find what I've done wrong. And so if I've done something wrong, I wish God would come tell me what it is. Because I can't find that I've done anything wrong. And the fact of the matter was, he hadn't done anything wrong. What he ultimately came to is no matter what. By the way, Job is the epitome of this attitude in practice. Job came to the point that he said, you know what, it doesn't really matter in the long run. As long as breath is in my nostrils, I will not forsake God. No matter how bad it gets. No matter what happens. That's the same attitude of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace as well, right? Or Daniel in the lion den. Doesn't matter how bad it gets, and with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they even actually said it. Even if I die in this furnace, even if God allows me to be burned, not going to say anything against God. I'm going to remain faithful to Him because they understood that life is not about what happens under the sun. That is what Ecclesiastes is about. Life is not about what happens under the sun. What happens under the sun is about what life is really about. I'm going to be judged for what I do while in the body. But what I'm doing in the body is about what's to come, not what's here and now. It's about the blessings that are promised, not what I have. Even if I'm made the wealthiest man on the earth by God, y'all can pray for that if you want. Even if God blesses me in that way, I haven't received the real blessing that I'm working for. And if He takes it all away the next day, guess what? I haven't lost anything. Those are temporary things that are connected with time. And what's important is eternal. Yes, sir. Right.
And the objective is not necessarily success, depending on how you define success.
Let's be honest. Money makes things easier. And by the way, the Bible teaches that too, doesn't it? That money makes things easier. But it makes things easier in time. What kind of steward I am over material things isn't about how many material things I come into possess. What kind of steward I am over material things is all about what kind of spiritual inheritance I receive. And that's something that's hard for us to keep focused on. As he keeps going, and this is connected to everything else, so we can continue this discussion and keep bringing some of these things back into it. So don't feel like just because I'm moving on that we're not talking about that anymore. We are. Verse 16, when I applied my heart to know wisdom, to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes sleep. Now, the minute I read that, I know that he is using what? Some type of figure of speech, because people sleep. And so when he says that neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, that doesn't describe anybody. If you stay up long enough, what eventually happens to you? You finally just fall asleep. You don't have a choice. You just collapse. And his point is continually, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. When you look at all of this stuff, you see the business that's done on the earth continually. I saw the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. So I'm looking at everything that's done under the sun, and what he's admitting here is no matter how hard I search, no matter if I stay awake 24 hours a day looking at everything that's done, I still am not going to see everything that's happening. There's still things happening that I don't have any way of knowing about. We talked about that last week, remember? That maybe rulers come along and things are happening and it looks like evil's winning and we get frustrated, but in fact maybe God's at work nonetheless. When Nebuchadnezzar was rising, why in the world would he let the evil Babylonians do all this and have all this prosperity and gain all this land and all this wealth? Well, he was doing it for a purpose. There was something at work. There were two things at work particularly. One, he was judging his own people for their unfaithfulness. Two is, he was overseeing in the history of man to bring Christ into the world. That was part and parcel of the work that God did to bring Jesus into the world. There was something going on, but you couldn't see it. And no matter how hard you looked, you didn't know what was happening. That's what he's talking about here. I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that's done under the sun. However much a man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out, even though a wise man claims to know. He cannot find out. Even though there is unjust things happening on the earth, even though some wicked people seem to get the life of the righteous, and righteous people seem to get the life of the wicked, even though things are upside down and topsy-turvy and don't seem fair, that doesn't mean that God's not here, and that doesn't mean that God's not at work. People ask the question all the time, if God is good, then how come there's evil in the world? That question is based in the presumption that when evil is happening, that God is not at work. It does not mean that God is not working. It does not mean that God is not aware. It does not mean that those people will escape judgment. It does not mean that things will not be set right, and it does not mean that those righteous people who are getting the fruits of wickedness on earth under the sun will not, like the poor beggar Lazarus, be received by the angels and taken into paradise to rest in the bosom of Abraham. And while the rich man looked like he was living sumptuously and wonderfully and having all the blessings of God while on earth, died and was buried. And opened his eyes, and where was he at again? Oh, in torment, in agony in these flames. See, God's at work even though it may not look like it, even though it may not seem right and just to us in our assessment right now. What we don't know is we don't know everything. And what this ought to do is make us be a little bit more humble. And learn how to be content in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And accept what we cannot change. And continue to put our faith and trust in a good God, whom, if we serve faithfully, we can reach the end of our life with the same confidence that Paul did, saying, I've fought the good fight, I've kept the faith. By the way, Paul described his own life how? Let's see, he was beaten, he was stoned, he was left for dead, he was jailed, he was mocked, he was homeless, he was... What did he say about that? I fought the good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. He didn't quit. That's also why he repeatedly says to us what? Do not grow weary in well-doing, for in due time you will reap if you don't grow weary. Don't think that because there's injustice in the world that God's not at work. Don't think that you can escape judgment because you didn't get in trouble immediately when you did it. I struggle as a parent with such questions. When do you lay down the law, and when do you let them get away with it? And let the consequences come later so they learn. Sometimes judgment is delayed. But that doesn't mean judgment doesn't come. Got to stop. Appreciate everybody's participation in the discussion tonight. Lord willing, I'll be back a week from tonight.